Hey guys, and welcome to Petrol Ped. Now, I've headed over to my good friends at Anthony James Cars because I haven't been here for ages. But last week, Daniel emailed me and he said, Ped, we've got a car you need to drive. It's from 1987. It's rear wheel drive. It's air cooled. It's a classic. Don't worry, it's not this VW microbus. The car I'm going to drive today is parked inside. Come on, let's take a look. I love coming here because there are always lovely cars to be looking at. First up, a GT3. I do need to scratch my GT3 itch one day, maybe one day. But this 911 Carrera T is a stunning example. Lovely wheels. Cayman GT4 in black, very similar to the car I drove on the NC500 a couple of years ago, although that's got the carbon buckets. This beautiful Maserati, although sadly, that's just been sold, literally when I arrived this morning. A 992 GT3 in sharp blue, lovely car, comfort seats as well. That V8 Defender's pretty special. Then in the background, that £25,000 for a BMW M5, absolute bargain. F1 Edition Vantage. I've got a bit of love going on for this Nissan GTR because that colour is absolutely exceptional. And then we've got an F12. We've got a bit of AMG goodness. We've got an 812 Superfast and a 488. But none of those are the cars that I'm going to be driving today. Oh no, the car I'm going to be driving today is this 1987 Porsche 930 Turbo. There's a story to tell. This car is a childhood hero of mine. Now, it's not exactly a big secret that I'm a huge Porsche fan and owner. But when I was at Box and Gas Megaphonics a couple of weeks ago to record a Drive Talk podcast with Michelin, that event was a real eye-opener for me. We were surrounded by Porsches of all vintages, from the modern day stuff all the way back to classics, air-cooled and water-cooled. And the more time I spend around those older Porsches, the more desirable they become to me, the more I think about what it would be like to own a classic Porsche as a fun day car, really, a Sunday and fun day car. And there are many of them. But this, the 930 Turbo, this was, when I was growing up as a kid, this was the daddy. This is what, for me, Porsche, the first car I really understood to be a Porsche. So a little bit of history to this car. If you go back to the late 60s and early 70s, Porsche had started to play with turbocharging in their race car program, and they wanted to go Group 4 and Group 5 racing. And those cars ended up being the 934 and the 935. But Group 4 racing, so this is the car that became the 934, had to be based on a road-going car, a homologated car. I think the rules at the time, they had to make 400 units over 24 months. So the 930 Turbo was really the car they made to homologate into Group 4, and then Group 5 was basically derived from Group 4. So they started making this car in 1975 to homologate for the 1976 Group 4 and Group 5 race series. And back then, this was a really, really rapid car. And I remember it when I was growing up because they made this car from 1975 all the way up to 1989, the years of my youth. And when I was at school, I remember a friend of mine in my year, his dad bought one, a red 930 Turbo Cabriolet, and he only had it for a couple of months and basically got rid of it because it was too scary, it was too fast. And these cars had quite a reputation because for back then, these things were really powerful and very, very rapid. So what makes the 930 Turbo so iconic? Well, I guess aesthetically, it's this, right? Many people call this a whale tail. Actually, in the earlier cars, this was called the T-tray spoiler, but it's just such a statement piece. But at the back of the car in 75, the first 930 Turbos had a 3-litre flat-six air-cooled turbocharged engine, rear-mounted, coupled to a 4-speed manual gearbox. And that produced 260 horsepower, which back in the 70s was a lot. This car would do 0 to 62 in 5.2 seconds and a top speed of 155 miles an hour. But they only made the 3-litre for 2 years, from 75 to 77, and they only made about 2,800 of them. In 77, they bought out this. So now we've upped the capacity of the engine slightly. This is now a 3.3-litre air-cooled flat-six turbo, but now there's an intercooler on there, and the T-tray just sits a little bit higher on the intercooler cast to make space for the intercooler. Performance is now upped to about 300 horsepower, so quicker 0 to 60 time, around 5 seconds. Top speed of about 162 miles an hour, which in the late 70s and 80s was a lot. There was also a performance pack you could buy later on in the 80s from Porsche that increased the power output of the engine to 330 horsepower. And then right at the end of the run, because they made this car up to 1989, there was also a variant of the 930 Turbo that had a 5-speed manual gearbox, and they're quite sought after. This is a 4-speed 1987 car, but look at it, just a beautiful, beautiful thing. So yeah, when I was growing up, I had a poster of one of these on my bedroom wall. It was eventually replaced with a poster of the F40 and the Porsche 959 when they came out. But I just loved these things. They made them in coupe, targa and cabriolet format, but they did have a bit of a reputation. They had a real nasty bite to them, these. Partially due to the shorter wheelbase, also the fact that the engine's hanging out over the rear axle, and they had lots of power with a particularly boosty nature to the turbo. So you'd be driving along and the boost comes in and all the power comes in, and if you were going around a corner or if it was a low traction surface, it'd been raining, they had a bit of a reputation for swapping ends and sticking you into a ditch. And I know lots of different Porsches throughout history have been tagged the Widowmaker, but this was one of the first to get that name. But it is a beautiful, beautiful looking thing. Now, the 911 has evolved an awful lot since these, and all modern day 911s are turbocharged. But one of the things you get when you look at something like that GT3 behind me is the sheer scale. This is dinky compared to a modern day 911. Porsche have done a huge amount of work. The engine's in the wrong place. It's hanging behind the rear axle. It's a terrible place to put the engine, really. You know, ideally you want it mid-mounted where you can get really nice weight distribution. But Porsche have engineered their way out of that fundamental flaw to the 911's design. Unfortunately, this car is pre that engineering, so you do have to be a little bit careful. I'm going to be allowed to drive it very shortly. Luckily, it's a lovely, hot, sunny day today. But before we take it out for a drive, let's have a look on the inside. And one of the things that won't come across on camera is when you start this car up, and we've been maneuvering it around today, the smell, just that combination of oil and petrol, it just smells delicious. Now, I'm sure I already have some people starting to type comments about my comment a couple of minutes ago about all modern day 911s being turbocharged. Clearly they're not all turbocharged. Some of the GT cars are still naturally aspirated, but I think you get what I was saying. In fact, the new 992.2 is hybridized as well. But if you sit inside a classic 911, for me it starts off with this steering wheel. It's so simple, but that design just harks back to photographs and pictures I've seen in magazines. You've got the 5 dials, all analog dials with a big rev counter in the middle. Sadly, that we now don't have the analog rev counter in the latest iteration of 911. But it's so simple and so basic in here. You've still got the kind of 2+2 format with the 2 seats in the back. It's tiny as a footprint on the outside, but actually it's relatively spacious on the inside. But it is proper back to basics. And then the thing that you probably, until you sit in one of these, the pedals are just offset to the left a little bit. You've got some space there for the front wheel well. So I kind of feel like my legs are just canted off to the left a little bit. And then I've got the 4-speed box. I haven't driven a car with only 4 gears for a very, very long time. So this is a 4-speed variant. Very, very simple. There's an old Kenwood system in there. It is actually one with a CD player by the looks of it. Lovely old temperature controllers with the big sliders. And look at this. You don't see that in cars very often. A cigarette lighter, absolutely love that. But yes, I think we get some cameras set up and take this out for a spin, because I think it's going to be pretty special. Okay, here we go. I will admit to being a tad intimidated, not because of the reputation of the 930 Turbo per se, but just it's a beautiful car, turned out magnificently, and it is for sale. But already it's very different in terms of driving dynamics to a modern day 911. First up, the pedals come out of the floor rather than hanging from the top of the dashboard, so that just gives them a very different feel. The steering wheel's very flat in front of me, and I just want to kind of ease myself into the car, let the car warm up, which is super important with these types of cars. Let the kind of oils and all the temperature build up before I start to drive it harder, although I don't honestly think I'm going to be driving it that hard. The gearbox itself is relatively tricky. First is just to make sure you're in first. You probably heard me as I pulled away. It wasn't quite, the gears weren't quite meshed together. I've only got 4 gears, so I can't go too wrong, surely. But the view out of the door mirror is ace. You can just see the side of that T-tray spoiler on the back. You can't really see it out the back window, but it is just magnificent. And then bearing in mind this car's from 1987, it's got electric and heated seats, which is cool. It's a top spec car, this. So I've been able to get into a pretty good driving position. I might even be able to move my seat back just a little bit more. Oh no, that's the, that's weird. Well, there we go. So I'm a little bit further back, that's better. Very cool. So let me just ease into this car a little bit more. I need to work out how to turn the air conditioning on, because I'm absolutely baking already. But yeah, amazing experience. Oh, here we go, out onto the onto a dual carriageway. The gearbox is warming up nicely, so that change into first is a lot easier than when we did the cold start. I'm still waiting for the engine to fully warm up. Special thing. Oh, there we go. So if you poodle along 2,000 to 3,000 RPM, the turbo's not really doing anything. Feels a bit dead really on the foot. The second you start reaching anything above about 3.5, getting onto 4,000 RPM, then the turbo starts to spool up and starts to work for you. I'm still just waiting for all the temperatures to come up, and then hopefully we'll be able to give it a bit of squirt. It's such a dinky car, this. It's a mega view out the front window. You've got the 2 bulges from the headlamps. Such an iconic view. I'm sat really low in the car. I'm very close to the front windscreen. I think these earlier 911s, the front windscreen was so raked up. I mean, I literally just don't even have to stretch and I can touch even the bottom of the windscreen. You couldn't do that in modern day 911. So you feel really close and really connected to the car. The steering at slow speeds is very heavy, but once you're at speed, it frees itself up really nicely. I'm now in 4th gear, I'm doing 70 miles an hour, and I'm doing just under 3,000 RPM, so it actually cruises really nicely. The visibility is excellent. I guess cars of this vintage, the pillars are so thin, the A-pillar's so tiny, you barely notice it's there. And all the glass in the car, it's just a really nice airy cabin. This car's also spec'd with a sunroof. I won't open that today. But yeah, very cool. So as soon as we start to get some temperature into the car, we can maybe open her up a little bit. I've got a really great idea, the perfect road to take her to. Oh, there she is, bit of boost. I'll tell you what, when you hit 3,500 RPM in this car, things happen. So now we're at the bottom of a little bit of open flowing road. I'm getting more used to the car. The pedal box is very, very different to anything I've driven before. The steering wheel has a speed, a real weight to it, but it's just so much turbo lag in this car. I guess we're in the very early days of turbocharging back in the mid-80s, and what happened was you didn't get a great deal of power, and then when the turbo spooled up and it started to build up pressure on the inlet of the engine, you start getting the power come in. And then when it does come in, it comes in hard. So you get to 4,000 and whoosh, there we go. Oh, wow. But I can imagine if you're really pushing on in this wet or damp or cold, when that power kicks in, this car is so light compared to modern day 911s. It really has got quite a character to it. It sits on the road nicely. Now, one of the challenges of getting an older classic, really, these are classic cars now, is, you know, inside there's none of the mod cons, there's no CarPlay in this thing. But even though the stereo's just decided to turn itself on, here we go. 3.5, there's 4,000, there we go. Up to 6, change at 6. And this is a fast car, even by modern day standards, once that boost comes in. It reminds me a little bit, a few years ago, I had one of the very early Audi Quattros. It was a 1983 car, left-hand drive. And that was a couple of 100 horsepower, and I remember just sitting there. By modern day standards, it was fast, but I'm sitting there thinking now, what the hell was this like in 1979 when they started making this 300 horsepower version? It must have been unworldly. Absolutely bonkers. I guess it's now, if you were to sit in a 911, you know, 992 911 that does 0 to 60 in, you know, under 3 seconds, they are bonkers machines. But this, get yourself a time machine, go back in time and sit in this back in the day. Wow, I mean, seriously. This example though, as I said, it is for sale. I'll put a link in the description below and in a pinned comment. It's punching a little bit beyond my budget, sadly. The speedo's reading 83,000 miles on the clock. It's been well used, but it's still in excess of 100 grand, which is a lot of money. However, the smart money, I think, is if you went and spent 100 grand on a modern day 911, a 992, say a GTS, maybe the kind of car I might be thinking about buying next year. It's a modern day car, and although it will probably hold its value okay, it's still going to depreciate, it's still going to go down. These things are so sought after, and a good one, then they're going to hold their money. And actually, if anything, I wouldn't say anything's guaranteed in life, right? But for me, the chances of this car holding its money or even going up in value are pretty good. So I think your money's quite safe. And it's a stunning thing. And one of the things I've noticed already, driving it out and about, and you drive it through a village or a town, or you're at a junction, it's a happy car. It makes people happy. People wave at you and smile at you, and you get these kind of jealous looks from people in cars going, oh, look at that car. I remember those when I was a kid, if you're my vintage, that is. It's a special thing, this. And that's what makes me think, my next car, I need a car to do lots of miles in, but that isn't at the moment really my Porsche. I only use my Porsche for special trips or drive tours, that kind of thing. I use other cars or press cars or my Hendy Group long-termer for that. So in my new garage I could have something this special, and you really would look forward to driving it. Again, it reminds me of my neighbour's Rennsport 2.7 RS replica that I drove. on the channel, what, 18 months ago. That car put a smile on my face that's still there now, and this 930 Turbo is doing exactly the same thing. It's a magnificent thing. You kind of have to get used to older cars. They have noises and rattles and creaks that, especially when I've never driven it until today, so I'm hearing noises and I'm thinking, is that normal? I think they are all normal, by the way, but you just don't know. But that's kind of what gives it some character. But it's just a magnificent thing, this, an absolutely magnificent thing. I think the summary for me, my final impressions of the car, aren't based on a modern day Compass. They're not based on Porsches of today. Porsches have evolved so much. But I think for me, when you drive an older Porsche, I mean, the side profile hasn't changed a great deal since the very first 911s. And they've evolved over the years, and they've got bigger and fatter and heavier and wider and more powerful. I mentioned before, the Porsche engineers have managed to work out how to deal with the fact that the engine's hanging over the back axle, which isn't the best place for it. We've gone from air-cooled like this car to now modern day Porsches being water-cooled. So there's been all of this evolution. And regular watchers of the channel will be happy to know that this car has 6 cylinders and not 4. So I'm driving a proper Porsche. Apart from Patrick, who I do the podcast with, who's got a 912, and that's only got 4 cylinders. So you don't have to have 6, but this is a 6-cylinder, air-cooled, turbocharged Porsche 930 Turbo, and it's ace. Let me know what you think. What would your classic Porsche be? Which one would you go to? I'm still learning the backdating of all the different numbers. We went 930, this was replaced by the 993, then we went 997, then we went 996, 997, then we went 991, then we went 992. So what they're going to do after 992, considering we've already had a 993, it's ever so confusing, you know. But I love this car. Massive thanks to Dan and all the guys at Anthony James Cars. I've known those guys for a long time. The first car that I filmed with them was a beautiful Escort RS2000 with a Cosworth engine in it, in Alan Man racing colours. That video did so well, and I've known them ever since. And I've driven some fantastic cars with them. But I have to say, this is right up there for me. It's a real sense of occasion, and the more I'm driving it, the more comfortable I'm getting in it, and I think that's a really cool thing. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to enjoy my drive back to Anthony James Cars. If you enjoyed that one, please give me a thumbs up. Comments below are always welcome, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Petrol Ped for plenty more content to come. Yeah, I think this grin on my face is going to last quite a while. See you on the next film, guys. You take care. Drive safe.